not in the absence of challenges, not in perfect clarity, but in the understanding that you are being led, that you are not alone, that even in the moments when everything feels uncertain, when the next step is unclear, when the outcome is beyond your comprehension, God is working. So take the step, move forward, trust, because fear will tell you to stop, but faith will carry you through. And if you let it, it will take you exactly where you were always meant to be. When walking, people will try to stop you. That's inevitable. The moment you decide to move forward, the moment you choose to step into something meaningful, something that aligns with a higher purpose, opposition will appear. And it won't always be obvious. It won't always come in the form of enemies or external resistance. Sometimes it comes from the people closest to you. People who don't understand, people who doubt you, people who project their own fears onto your path. And that's difficult because as human beings, we want validation, we want support, we want the people around us to believe in what we're doing. But that's not how this works. The truth is, if you're walking a path that God has set before you, not everyone will understand it. Not everyone is supposed to. And if you're waiting for universal approval before you take action, you'll be waiting forever. It's a harsh reality, but it's one you have to accept. People will misunderstand you, some will dismiss you, some will outright oppose you. And when that happens, you have a choice. You can let their doubt weaken your resolve. You can shrink back, hesitate, start second-guessing yourself. Or you can recognize that their opposition has no power over what God has already determined. Because that's the real question here. Who do you believe has the final say? People, circumstances, or God? Think about it. If something is truly part of God's plan for your life, what could possibly stop it? What person, what obstacle, what resistance could stand in the way of something that was set in motion by the Creator of the universe? And yet people allow themselves to be thrown off course because someone else tells them they're not capable, or because the road is harder than they expected, or because they experience failure and assume it means they were wrong to begin with. But failure isn't proof that God's plan has been derailed. Obstacles aren't proof that you're going in the wrong direction. If anything, they're evidence that you're on the right path, because anything worth doing, anything of real value, comes with struggle, comes with resistance. That's the nature of meaningful pursuit. It demands perseverance. It demands conviction. It demands a level of trust that isn't easily shaken. And that's where so many people falter. They let the opposition dictate their course. They let fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of failure hold them back. But the moment you do that, the moment you let external voices carry more weight than the truth you already know, you surrender your own destiny. You hand over control to people who were never meant to shape your path in the first place. That's why you need to be unshakable. That's why you need to decide right now that no matter what comes against you, no matter who doubts you, no matter how difficult the road becomes, you will not turn back. Because it's not about whether people approve of you. It's not about whether the process is easy. It's about whether you trust that what God has for you cannot be stolen, cannot be blocked, cannot be stopped by anyone or anything. Look at history. Look at the lives of people who accomplished great things. Do you think they were met with universal support? Do you think they never faced obstacles? No. They were criticized. They were opposed. Some were even attacked for daring to move forward despite the resistance. But they didn't stop. They didn't let fear dictate their choices. And that's why they succeeded. That's why they fulfilled their purpose. And that's exactly what you have to do. You have to decide that no matter what, you are not giving up. That no voice of doubt, no rejection, no setback is enough to make you abandon what you were called to do. Because in the end, it doesn't matter what others say. It doesn't matter how many times you get knocked down. What matters is whether you keep going, whether you stay faithful, whether you trust that the plan God has for you is still in motion, even when it doesn't look like it. Because if God has set something in place, no one, not a single person, can stop it. And that means you don't have to be afraid. You don't have to waste energy worrying about who supports you and who. You don't have to fight battles that aren't yours to fight. You just have to keep moving forward, knowing that what is meant for you will happen, no matter what. Doubt is corrosive. It eats away at your confidence, at your resolve, at your ability to move forward. It starts as a whisper, a subtle suggestion that maybe you're not good enough. Maybe you've misunderstood your purpose entirely. And if you entertain it long enough, it grows. It takes root. It spreads like poison through your mind until suddenly you find yourself paralyzed, hesitant, uncertain, unwilling to take the next step because you've convinced yourself that failure is inevitable. And that's exactly how people become stuck. Not because they lack potential, not because they aren't capable, but because they've allowed doubt to distort their perception of reality. They stop trusting in what they once knew to be true. They stop believing that the obstacles they face are part of the journey and start assuming they are signs to turn back. But doubt is a liar. It doesn't reflect the truth, it reflects fear. And fear has a way of making everything look far worse than it actually is. So you have to ask yourself, where does doubt come from? And why does it always seem to show up when you're on the verge of something important? Why does it get louder the closer you get to stepping into what you were meant to do? That's not a coincidence. That's resistance. That's the weight of opposition trying to keep you from moving forward. Because if you let doubt control you, if you let it dictate your actions, then you'll never take the risks necessary for growth. You'll stay where it's safe. You'll never know what could have been because you never gave yourself the chance to find out. But trust works the opposite way. Trust silences doubt. Trust reminds you that just because you can't see the outcome yet, doesn't mean the outcome isn't certain. Trust is the choice to keep going even when every fearful thought in your mind is telling you to turn back. And trust isn't passive. It's not something that just happens. It's something you have to fight for. Because doubt won't disappear on its own. It has to be challenged. It has to be confronted with something stronger. And there's nothing stronger than faith. Faith is what allows you to step forward even when you don't have all the answers. Faith is what keeps you grounded when everything around you feels uncertain. Faith is what reminds you that you're not alone, that you're not navigating this journey aimlessly, that there is a plan unfolding, even when you can't yet see its full design. And this is the key. Faith doesn't mean you won't experience difficulty. It doesn't mean the path will always be clear or that you'll always feel confident in your choices. It means that even in the midst of uncertainty, even in the moments when doubt creeps in, you refuse to let it dictate your actions. You refuse to let it take control. Because trust isn't about having absolute certainty in the outcome. And if you trust in that, then you don't have to be shaken every time things don't go according to your expectations. You don't have to collapse under the weight of uncertainty. You don't have to entertain every fearful thought that enters your mind. You can stand firm knowing that no matter what happens, no matter what challenges arise, no matter how many times doubt tries to pull you off course, you are still being led exactly where you need to be. And this is where most people fail, not because they weren't meant for something greater, not because they didn't have the ability, but because they let doubt convince them to quit. They let the fear of uncertainty become bigger than their faith in the process. But the ones who refuse to give in, the ones who keep going despite every reason to stop, those are the ones who reach their destination. Those are the ones who look back and realize that every step, even the painful ones, even the confusing ones, even the ones that felt like failure, was necessary, was part of something bigger, was leading them somewhere they couldn't yet see. That's why you don't stop. That's why you don't let doubt win. Because if you knew, if you truly understood where this path was leading, you wouldn't hesitate. You wouldn't question. You wouldn't let fear steal what is meant for you. You would keep going, no matter what. There comes a moment when everything you've fought through, everything you've endured, everything that tried to stop you but couldn't, leads to the undeniable realization that what was meant to be will be. And not because you forced it, not because you manipulated circumstances to make it happen, but because no power on earth, no voice of doubt, no obstacle, no failure, no opposition could stop what God had already determined. That's the truth. That's the foundation you stand on. Look back. Think about the moments you thought would break you, the times when you were certain it was over, when the weight of uncertainty, of fear, of struggle felt unbearable. But you're still here. You move forward anyway. And you didn't just survive, you grew, you gained strength, you learned things you never would have understood if the path had been easy. That's the evidence. That's the proof. Because if something could have stopped you, it would have. If failure had the power to define you, you'd still be stuck where you started. If doubt was stronger than faith, you would have given up a long time ago. But you didn't. You pressed on. You made the choice over and over again to keep walking, even when you didn't know exactly where you were going. And now, standing here, you see it. You see that none of it was wasted. That every setback, every detour, every moment of struggle had a purpose. That's what happens when you trust in something greater than yourself. That's what happens when you refuse to let fear dictate your story. You get to witness the unfolding of a plan that was always in motion, always leading you towards something bigger than you could have imagined. And there's a deep sense of peace in that, because you no longer have to carry the burden of trying to control everything. You no longer have to live in fear of what might go wrong. And that's not to say challenges won't come. That's not to say you won't face moments of difficulty. But the difference is now you know. Now you've seen firsthand that no matter what happens, no matter what stands in your way, nothing can change what's already been set in place. Nothing can take from you what was always yours. And that kind of certainty, that kind of unshakable confidence is rare. Most people spend their lives chasing it, searching for it in all the wrong places. But you have it because you've lived it, because you've seen the evidence. And now the question is, what do you do with that knowledge? Do you let it transform the way you move through life? Do you let it strengthen you, embolden you, free you from the weight of fear? Because that's the next step, to not just believe it, but to embody it, to carry yourself as someone who knows beyond a shadow of a doubt that nothing can stand in the way of what God has for you. To move forward without hesitation, without fear, without the need for constant reassurance. Because when you truly understand that nothing and no one can stop what has already been put into motion, you stop playing small, you stop second-guessing yourself, you stop hesitating when opportunities arise, stop overanalyzing every decision out of fear of making the wrong one. You walk boldly, you trust fully, and you live with a kind of certainty that cannot be shaken by circumstances, by opinions, by anything that tries to stand in your way. That's what separates those who fulfill their purpose from those who don't. It's not talent, it's not luck, it's not even intelligence. It's the willingness to trust, the refusal to let fear win, the decision to keep going no matter what. And when you do that, when you truly commit to that mindset, you'll see how unstoppable you really are. Because what's meant for you will happen, no matter what. Life is unpredictable. It unfolds in ways we can't always anticipate, often presenting challenges that seem insurmountable, obstacles that make us question our direction, and circumstances that appear to work against us. But here's the truth. There is a plan in motion. One that transcends our understanding, one that operates beyond our immediate perception. And that plan, it's not yours to control. It's not yours to dictate. It is God's plan. And no one, no force of opposition, no societal pressure, no individual working against you can stop what He has set in motion. Now, that's an unsettling realization for some people because we like control. We want certainty. We want to believe that if we just work hard enough, if we just push forward with enough determination, then we can shape the world exactly as we see fit. And while discipline, effort, and personal responsibility are absolutely necessary, there's something deeper at play. There's an underlying structure to existence itself, something greater than any one of us, something that determines the trajectory of things in ways we can't always comprehend. That's God's sovereignty. You see, when you step back and examine the patterns of life, you start to notice something remarkable. How often have you looked back at a moment of despair, at a failure, a rejection, a season of hardship, only to realize later that it was absolutely necessary, that without it, you wouldn't have gained the wisdom, the resilience, the strength required for what came next. The setbacks weren't interruptions of the plan, they were the plan. And no matter how much resistance you faced, no matter how many people tried to hold you back, the truth remained, God's plan was still in motion. It was never derailed, not even for a moment. And yet we panic, we resist, we become anxious when life doesn't unfold the way we expect it to. Why? Because we assume that we can see the whole picture. But what if we can't? What if what we perceive as chaos, what we perceive as unfair, what we perceive as insurmountable is actually the precise sequence of events required for our own transformation? What if the very thing we're trying to escape is the thing designed to prepare us? That's the problem with assuming that our perspective is the ultimate measure of truth. It's not. We are finite. We are limited. But God is not. And if God is not limited, then what He has set into motion cannot be stopped. Not by you, not by anyone. That means no matter how much opposition you face, no matter how many people stand against you, no matter how difficult the road becomes, if God has determined your path, then there is no force strong enough to block it. Now that should give you a sense of both humility and relief. Humility, because it means you are not the master of the universe. You do not dictate how every detail unfolds. But relief, because it means you don't have to. Your job isn't to control everything. Your job is to trust, to act with integrity, to move forward with courage, knowing that whatever comes against you is powerless against God's will. And people will try to stop you. Of course they will. That's the nature of reality. People are flawed, self-interested, often blind to what's truly happening. Some will misunderstand you. Some will doubt you. You may even feel betrayed by those you thought would support you. But even betrayal, even opposition, even those moments where it seems like everything is crumbling, none of it can override God's plan. If something is meant for you, it will be. And if something is not, no amount of striving will make it so. So the real question isn't will things work out, because they will, just maybe not in the way you expect. The real question is, will you trust? Will you trust when the road is unclear? Will you trust when doors close? Will you trust when the world tells you you're failing? That's where faith comes in, not as some abstract belief, not as some vague optimism, but as a deep, unshakable understanding that God is working even when you can't see it. And here's the thing. You may not always understand His plan while you're in it. That's frustrating, right? Because we want clarity now. We want to know exactly why things happen as they do. But life doesn't work that way. The story unfolds one chapter at a time, and sometimes you don't understand the earlier pages until much later. That's why hindsight is so powerful. It reveals what was always true, but what you weren't ready to see at the time. So here's what you do. You keep going. You keep walking. You keep showing up, knowing that nothing can stop what God has ordained. That means you don't have to force it. You don't have to manipulate outcomes. You just have to be faithful, to stay obedient, to act with integrity, and trust that in the grand scheme of things, everything is unfolding exactly as it should. Because if God is for you, who can be against you? Life is full of suffering. That's the truth. It's unavoidable. And if you think you can somehow maneuver your way around every hardship, that you can construct a life so perfectly controlled that you'll never have to endure difficulty, you're mistaken. The world doesn't work like that. Pain and struggle aren't anomalies. They're built into the very structure of existence. But here's the thing, suffering is not meaningless. It's not just random chaos thrown at you for no reason. No, it has a function, it has a purpose. The very challenges that seem like they are breaking you apart are often the exact things necessary for your transformation. But that only becomes evident if you refuse to give in to despair, if you refuse to let suffering turn into resentment. Because the truth is, the struggle itself is part of God's plan. Now, that's a difficult idea. People don't want to hear that. They want to believe that if they're experiencing hardship, then something must be wrong, that if they're suffering, it must mean they've taken a wrong turn somewhere. But what if that's not the case? What if the suffering isn't an interruption of the plan, but an integral part of it? What if the very thing you're trying to escape is the thing designed to shape you? Think about it. How do people become stronger? How do they develop character? How do they grow in wisdom, in resilience, in faith? It doesn't happen through comfort. It doesn't happen when everything is easy. It happens in the fire. It happens when you're tested, when you're thrown into situations that demand more from you than you think you can give. And then somehow you make it through. Somehow you endure. And on the other side of that suffering, you're not the same person. You're stronger, wiser, more capable than you were before. That's the paradox of struggle. It feels like it's tearing you apart, but in reality, it's refining you. It's removing the parts of you that can't go where God is leading you. It's teaching you patience. It's teaching you perseverance. It's teaching you trust. And trust is essential because the hardest part of struggle isn't just enduring it. It's not knowing when it will end. It's walking through a valley so deep and so dark that you start to wonder if there's even a way out. That's the real test, isn't it? It's not just about surviving hardship. It's about continuing forward when you have no evidence that relief is coming. That's faith. Faith isn't just believing in God when things are going well. Anyone can do that. Faith is believing in Him when everything seems to be falling apart. It's standing firm in the storm, knowing that even though you can't see the way forward, He can. And that's exactly why people fail. Not because they're incapable, not because they don't have potential, but because they lose faith in the process. They hit an obstacle, and instead of seeing it as part of the journey, they see it as a reason to quit. But quitting is the only real failure, because the moment you stop moving forward, the moment you decide that the struggle is too much, that's the moment you forfeit the future that was waiting for you on the other side. And let's be honest, when you're in the middle of suffering, you don't see the bigger picture. You don't see how it fits into the plan. But that doesn't mean the plan isn't there. It just means you're not far enough along to understand it yet. Have you ever looked back at a time in your life that was incredibly difficult and realized in hindsight that it had to happen? That if it hadn't, you wouldn't have learned what you needed to learn? That you wouldn't be where you are now? That's why you don't give up. That's why you keep moving forward even when it hurts. Because what you're facing today isn't the end of the story. It's just a chapter. And the hardest chapters always come before the breakthrough. So what do? You endure. You refuse to let the struggle define you. You refuse to let pain turn into bitterness. You keep going, knowing that no matter how difficult it gets, no matter how many obstacles stand in your way, if you stay faithful, if you keep walking, then one day you'll look back and realize that every challenge, every setback, every painful moment, it was all necessary. It was all leading somewhere, because God doesn't make mistakes, and He certainly doesn't abandon His plan. Uncertainty is terrifying. It grips you in ways that are difficult to articulate. It keeps you up at night, gnawing at the edges of your mind, whispering every possible thing that could go wrong. And the worst part, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if what you're doing is going to work. You don't know if the path you're walking is going to lead where you hope it will. That's the weight of the unknown, and it's heavy. That's why people crave control. That's why they plan, why they strategize, why they try to account for every possible variable. Because the idea of stepping forward into something without knowing exactly how it will turn out is unsettling. It's vulnerable. It forces you to confront the reality that despite your best efforts, despite your intellect, despite your preparation, there are things you simply cannot dictate, and that's where fear thrives. Because when you don't know what's coming, your mind fills in the blanks. And it doesn't fill them with optimism. It fills them with doubt, with worst-case scenarios, with a paralyzing sense that maybe you're making the wrong move. Maybe you're heading straight for disaster. Maybe this whole thing is doomed before it even begins. That's how fear works. It doesn't need to be real. It just needs to be convincing. But what if there's another way? What if instead of fear, you chose trust, and not blind, naive trust? This isn't about pretending everything is fine when it isn't. No, this is about trusting in something bigger than yourself. Trusting that even when you don't see the full picture, there is a plan. Trusting that even when the road ahead is foggy, the destination is secure. That's faith. Faith isn't a feeling, it's a choice. It's a deliberate decision to believe that God is guiding your steps even when you don't understand how. And that is not easy. It's not comfortable. It demands something from you. It demands surrender. And people don't like that word because to surrender means to let go of control, to release your grip on the need to predict every outcome. But that's the irony, isn't it? Because control is an illusion. You never had it to begin with. How many times in your life have things gone differently than you planned? How often have you looked back and realized that something you thought was a mistake, something you thought was a failure, was actually the best thing that could have happened? You've seen it. You've experienced it, and yet, when uncertainty arises again, you doubt. That's the nature of being human, but that's also why faith is a discipline. It's something you practice, something you develop, something you cultivate over time. And here's what happens when you do. You stop being paralyzed by fear. You stop hesitating every time you face the unknown. You stop needing every step of the journey to be mapped out in advance before you take the first one. And do you know what that does? It frees you. It releases you from the anxiety that keeps so many people stuck. Because if you trust that God is in control, then you don't have to be. That doesn't mean you sit back and do nothing. That doesn't mean you stop being responsible for your actions. It means you move forward with confidence, knowing that even if things don't go the way you expected, they will go the way they are meant to. That's a different kind of strength. It's a different kind of security. It means you're no longer at the mercy of fear. You're no longer held hostage by what-ifs. And make no mistake, fear will still show up, doubt will still creep in, but the difference is you won't let it dictate your choices. You'll feel the fear and step forward anyway. You'll acknowledge the uncertainty and move regardless. Because trust isn't about eliminating fear, it's about refusing to let fear stop you. And that's where you find peace.